If you can't get a computer to do anything but frustrate you, try the computer you already know how to use. Take Macintosh out for a free overnight test drive.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Player One Start. Let's go ahead and begin with a teardown of the Macintosh Plus. Well, here it is. This is the Macintosh Plus. This is actually the third computer released in the Macintosh line that was introduced in January 16th of 1986, 2 years after the original Macintosh and a little more than a year after the Macintosh 512K. It originally sold for a price of about $2,599, which, if that sounds expensive today, when adjusted for inflation, that's almost $6,134.16 according to my inflation calculator. So it's no wonder why Apple had trouble selling these machines back in the day. However, having a built-in monitor and disk drive was part of this machine's appeal. And yes, here we can see that keyboard connector that used kind of like a phone jack design. As seen on the back, these machines shipped with 1 megabyte of RAM standard, but also could be upgraded to 4 megabytes. But when you take a look at the back, you can tell why these machines are hard to work on right from the get-go. Just to get this machine apart, you have to have a torque driver that is long enough to reach these screws. Since this is unique to the Macintosh, the tools meant to open these cases have been nicknamed the Mac Cracker. Here are what the screws look like. And here is the torque driver extension I have for my screwdriver. Even with this bit, my screwdriver was just barely long enough to clear the back of this plastic case to get the screws out. In the back here we have a conveniently designed battery backup that you can remove, and unfortunately this model has the battery still in it. I didn't realize this when I purchased it and probably should have checked it before now, and yeah, the battery has leaked and corroded everywhere in here. If I can get this machine working, I can go ahead and clean this up. But also underneath this battery cover, you can see there is another hex screw, and there are 2 more along the bottom that I'll need to remove before I can take this machine apart. But on an embarrassing note, I didn't realize until way too late that I can just use the same Torx driver to go ahead and get these screws out of the back as I used to get the screws out of the top. And yeah, I didn't realize this until after I'd already gone back to my work, grabbed my toolkit and come back, and then I was like, oh yeah, I can just use the same screwdriver. And now for one of the hardest parts of this project. Yeah, this thing did not want to come apart easily, and I probably could have used some sort of shim to kind of loosen the pieces apart from each other, but I didn't want to risk damaging the plastic. I did try with like a flathead screwdriver, but again, I was trying to be as gentle as possible. Eventually I just finally got everything to shake loose, and the two halves separated. And it did feel like such a victory when it finally did come apart. And now for the big reveal, and a word of warning. You can clearly see there's a lot of caution warnings on the back of this board here, and that is because there is a high voltage display in this system. And yes, it is actually possible to kill yourself on these if you're not careful. But anyway, before getting into the electronics part, I did want to take a look at the back of the case to see all the signatures that I knew were back here. Turning the system around, you can see that this is not a very good sign. This is obviously some sort of corrosion from either water or something that has dripped off the motherboard. This is actually directly underneath the motherboard of the system. For now, it seems that the screen is completely dead, but I may have a solution for that. So here's the LCD screen that I plan on using inside of the Mac. This is a 10-inch diagonal display, and it should fit just about right for this project. One advantage to using this display over others is that it actually has HDMI, VGA, and composite input, as well as a BNC connector, which I don't think I'll ever use, but it has it anyway. Here is the power adapter, BNC connector, a mount, a remote that may or may not still work, RCA composite and audio, a VGA cord hookup, and last, it even comes with an HDMI cable. I decided it'd be a good idea to test this and make sure it works before I get too far into disassembly. And after switching to HDMI, yep, this looks like it's going to work. Alright, so let's go ahead and get the 4 screws off of the back and crack this thing open. Another advantage to ordering this as a complete kit is that it has the controller board that you can separate from the screen and then reassemble later. Next, I'll take out all the mounting brackets that are holding the screen in. And yeah, then the bezel just comes straight off. Alright, so we have the screen out, and next I want to go ahead and do a test fit inside of the Mac, which means taking out all the old hardware. First I need to unplug the display from the motherboard, and it should just slide right out. And before putting this in storage, I thought I'd take a good look at the motherboard, and yeah, this thing actually looks almost pristine. The motherboard itself is in good shape, and I don't see anything glaring that is wrong with it. Alright, now that I got the analog board out, it is time to turn my attention to the CRT portion of the board, and that means taking out some more hex screws. And the last thing to disassemble is the disk drive assembly, which is at the bottom of the front plate. And yeah, that is really close. It looks like the only thing prohibiting the display from actually sitting flush with the case is a little tab that sticks off to the side here. Now currently I don't have a good way of removing this piece. However, that is not the pressing issue. First, I need to get something that will allow me to mount this flat screen monitor to the curved bezel that's meant for the CRT. So you may not be able to tell on camera, but the area for the screen is actually recessed in a little bit to fit the normal curvature of a CRT monitor. And my goal is actually to fill that space in so there's not this huge gap between where the screen sits in the case and the front of the bezel. Alright, so here is the 3D printed design that I found. I think this part is something to help you mount the screen in, but I may not need these pieces. Even still, I am still going to print them out because you just never know. And here is the 3D design for the bezel to make a flat screen fit in that area that's curved and recessed for a CRT. All that was left to do was go ahead and download this design and get it into the proper format for the 3D printer. Let's go ahead and speed this up for a bit. So now I'm off to one of the hardware stores. I actually went to a couple other places, but this was the only one where I found 2 items that I was looking for. Alright, so I'm looking for some epoxy so I can attach the screen bezel that I'm 3D printing onto the Mac itself. That way I have something flush to mount the screen to. It took me a while to actually find the right kind of epoxy that I was looking for. I'm looking for something that's fast curing so I can immediately test this to see if it's going to work. Next, what I'm going to need are some clear plastic tubs that are big enough to submerge 2 pieces of plastic that I want to retrobright. So as you can see here, this is about 2 hours and 14 minutes into the project. And we're about at the halfway point here. It's about halfway up the bezel, and it has just started making the pegs for the mounting brackets. And the camera didn't well adjust after I turned the lights back on, but it ended up taking about 4 hours and 30 minutes to print this entire job. And here are what the pieces look like. And now that I have all of my materials for that, the first step is actually to clean up the case and get it as clean as I possibly can before I start retrobrighting. So when taking a look at the faceplate here, it doesn't show up well on camera, but there is some buildup of dirt and grime on the front of here that will need to be cleaned off. It is very essential that you clean your pieces very well before you try to retrobrite them, or else the process will not be effective. Essentially, you could end up with light and dark spots based on where the dust was when it was being retrobrighted. And as this is my first time trying this process out, I decided to go ahead and do the faceplate and the little battery door on the back so I can have some high contrast areas to compare how effective the process actually is. I'm going to start by cleaning this off with a little all-purpose cleaner. This cleaning solution essentially turns your rag into a dust magnet. Then I'll follow it up with a little bit of denatured alcohol to get rid of the more stubborn spots. Alright, that's looking really sharp. I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit of alcohol into this bowl and use a toothbrush dipped in alcohol to clean out these vents. After that's all done, I'll give this one final rinse in the sink and let it air dry before I start the retrobrighting process. This is actually the perfect spot for me to mount a couple of those lights so I can put a little container underneath here and try this experiment out. Oh yeah, and here's what it looks like with those UV lights on, and it looks kind of trippy. I don't know if you guys can see this because the background is white as well. Oh, I have dust on my shirt. Anything that is even a little bit reflective of UV light is glowing extremely bright right now. So I'm going to fill this tub up with warm water up until about the top of this piece. And then I'm going to top that off with this 40 volume high strength hydrogen peroxide. I'm going to turn off the lights and turn on the UV. Wow, this is actually very bright. It doesn't look that way on my camera because it is trying to auto-adjust to the amount of light being thrown out from this UV system. Messing with my settings, I was able to get it to show this, but this still doesn't even do it justice as to how bright this is in person. So now I'm going to turn my attention back to the second half of this case. As you can see, there's some residue here in the bottom I need to clean up, and I'm going to go ahead and start out with some alcohol to see if that'll clean up better. Alright, now that that's cleaned up, I'm going to turn my attention to the exterior of the case and start the whole process I did with the front part, beginning with using some all-purpose cleaner. And I just used a flat tip screwdriver and went ahead and peeled off the rubber feet. So this is after about 4 hours of sitting in this solution being exposed to UV light. I'm going to go ahead and take the piece out and see how it matches against the back of the case. Well, again, I'm having difficulty getting it to show up on camera, but you may be able to tell that there is actually a big difference between the two tones of the plastic now. So yeah, I am really excited. I've been wanting to do something like this for quite a while, and now that I know I have a reliable method that won't ruin my plastic, I might just have to do this to a few other consoles in my collection. And because this piece is so big and uses so much water, I had to use 2 bottles of hydrogen peroxide to be able to get the solution strong enough. I'm not quite sure how long this is going to take compared to the smaller piece, but it's all set for now and I can turn my attention back to the faceplate. And now for the part that may be a bit cringeworthy. So I can't get this screen to fit unless I modify this little plastic piece that juts out. And I'll probably need to sand this down a little bit, but yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Oh yeah, and it turns out the dimensions of my bracket are just a smidge off. So my quick and dirty solution is actually just to cut this in half so I don't have to wait for a whole new piece to print. The pieces acted like they didn't want to stay, so I actually had these clips handy, and I'll have to wait 30 minutes for this to cure, so I'm going to go ahead and check back on the Retrobrite. Here it's actually been about 4 hours later, and I'm actually not seeing much of a difference. If you look very closely, you can tell there are some bubbles, but the process is working a lot slower. This was something I was afraid of, as I had to have a much larger volume container that could accommodate this piece. So yeah, what you saw there was about 4 hours into it. And so what I decided to do for now is I'm actually going to reheat some of the water separately and then pour it back in to give it some heat. And then I'm going to rotate this piece about every 30 minutes to make sure that each side gets an even exposure. But I also ran into another issue. I wasn't running my camera for this or anything because I was just doing a test fit of the screen. I immediately heard a crunch. I broke the screen.
Will Tyler, get another screen. Will the Retrobrite dissolve the back of the case before it finishes retrobrighting? Does Tyler have any idea how to emulate a Macintosh on a Raspberry Pi? All of these answers and more in the thrilling conclusion of Player 1 Star.
3 different problems I still have to solve. The first one, and the most important I think, is the screen. The second problem I have to solve is this Retrobrite that seems to be taking forever. And the final problem will be getting a device set up that can emulate the original Macintosh, or at least the Macintosh Plus. Alright, so after 2 weeks of waiting, this screen that I ordered finally came in the mail. Now let's take a look at this screen. It's interesting, it still has the screen protector on it. Let's go ahead and do a test fit, and yeah, you can see that this screen actually would fall through the front of the hole, but I think I have a way around this. So my solution for this is actually to design a mount for the screen to fit inside of the Mac. Now usually to do this, I would create a prototype first out of cardboard. First, I'm going to get it to fit inside of the screen plate here. Alright, and you'll notice here that this actually doesn't look the best. The lines aren't straight or anything, and that's just because this is just a prototype board. It doesn't need to be perfect, just enough to get me the right dimensions and measurements. But for now, I'm also going to coat this in electrical tape because I want it to look black so I can tell about what this is going to look like when it's done. And yeah, here we go. This is our first prototype piece. And when I do a test fit of everything, it looks like this is going to work. Yeah, I'll have to narrow this up a little bit so that the screen doesn't show as much through, but I think this actually looks pretty nice so far. Alright, and just to temporarily mount this to my prototype piece, I'm going to go ahead and electrical tape this to the back. Again, I don't recommend this as a permanent solution, just something so I can do some testing on this unit. And here I'm going to punch holes in the cardboard so I know exactly where the screws need to go in. Again, this will help me when designing the final piece. And then I'm going to make the holes a little bit bigger so they will actually fit the screws in. Alright, now I'm going to mount the screen into the case using the original screws and the mounting brackets that came with the other screen. And thanks to the nature of the cardboard not being as stiff as the final product will be, the screen bezel actually looks a little bit crooked, but this will work fine for testing purposes. Now that I'm all done with the front part of the case, let's go ahead and check on the Retrobrite. Well, the good news is I'm starting to see a lot more bubbles form on this, so it looks like it's back to doing its job as normal. It is going to take a lot more time for this to work, but I'm glad that it's still going. Alright, so here's what I'm using. This is a Raspberry Pi Model 3, and I got this little kit, which includes a case, and a charger, and some heat sinks on here. Let's pull that cover off. So I believe this is the main CPU. This is probably running your video graphics. GPIO ports, headphone jack, HDMI. It says you can hook on a camera here, or display there. And on the side, you can see I have HDMI, audio separately in case I want to do that. and that's my power in. On the other side, I've got some USB ports and a LAN jack. I don't know if I'm going to use all these, but it's quite possible that I may use this in the future. So I'm just going to swap the hard drive out. I'm going to take that card out, and I'm going to prep a new card with a Raspberry Pi boot image. After re-prepping the card, I was able to boot into an image of Raspbian, and it looks like this is going to work. Considering the limited resources that the Raspberry Pi has, it's actually very impressive they can get a GUI interface similar to what you would see on most other operating systems these days to run on this. And after getting the system prepped, it looks like, yes, I am able to boot into an emulated version of Macintosh System 7. For the particular emulator I'm using, I'm actually going to have to create my own hard disk and install the System 7 software. So I'm going to go ahead and speed through this so you can just kind of see this is actually sped up around 40 times the amount of time it actually took me to do this. And this particular emulator allows you to speed up the functions of everything to make the system run faster. So it won't take as much time as it did back in the 80s or early 90s to install this, but it still takes a significant amount of time. I'm also upgrading from System 7.0 to 7.5.5. One of the advantages to this is that I can actually use the color desktop interface to get color graphics. And as much as the black and white interface is nostalgic, I actually prefer the color graphics better. And since this machine's never going to look original, I think that this will be acceptable for my purposes. Pure nostalgia. Alright, so it's actually been 12 hours since I started the Retrobright process on this. I'm actually running out of time on this project, so it looks like this is as far as I'm going to be able to make it. I'm actually hoping this is good enough for it to match what the rest of the case looks like. I really don't want that two-tone look in the plastic. And, well, this is strange, but this two-tone look in the plastic is actually not as evident in person than it is on the camera. It looks like my HDR has kicked in. The back of the case actually shows this a lot better, as the battery cover matches the back of the case with just a hint of being a little bit brighter. But overall, this is actually much better than the case looked before. This is a lot farther than I thought I would get with this project, and I'm very glad I have at least something working in here. One other thing that's still outstanding is I do have to come up with a more permanent solution to mount the screen. That said, that is going to wrap things up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you liked about today's video, what you'd like to see in the future. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you all in the next one.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.